Very good. Well, welcome everyone to today's Silicon Valley Forum Fireside Chat. This is a very unique one in many ways, both with the sector that our guest is operating in and the general marketplace of the sector itself. But the title of today's event is called Solving Children's Scoliosis, a Silicon Valley Forum Fireside Chat with John Ashley. John is the co-founder and CEO of Auctus Surgical in Danville, California. And before we get started in the conversation, we have a few announcements. First, what is the Silicon Valley Forum? We are a California-based 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our mission is to foster innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership in Silicon Valley and throughout the world. We achieve our mission through events, programs, and conferences, and we function as a center of knowledge and connections, covering everything from the latest tech trends to the startup and investment ecosystem. And our activities are aimed to educate, train, inspire, and connect technologists, entrepreneurs, corporates, and investors. We have a few events coming up. On March 19th, we've got another Silicon Valley Forum Fireside Chat with Michael Russell about evolving the game day experience. Michael is a big sports fan and has an app and service that will help people attending live sporting events becoming more engaged, and ultimately that might drive revenue for sponsors and advertisers at the game. For those who live in the San Francisco Bay Area, we'll be convening at the Alviso Marina County Park in North San Jose, California for the March Coastal Habitat Restoration Day. And then next month, or I guess we're not quite into next month yet, but in April, be attending the 18th Annual Star Tides Capabilities Demonstration in Arlington, Virginia. Silicon Valley Forum is a sponsor of that event. And that'll be held at George Mason University's Arlington campus. And the Tides Fly-Along event at the Pentagon Center Courtyard will take place. And the April 24th, 2025, we'll be doing the Chinatown Hall. Right now scheduled for online, but we may be moving that to downtown San Francisco, and actually at a location where John and I recently met on a beautiful historic ship that's docked in the San Francisco Bay, that's used as a meeting space with the Bay Area Economic Council and their offices. The lawyers, to keep them happy, have to read this disclaimer that the Silicon Valley Forum, a California Public Benefit Corporation, SVF, does not endorse or sponsor any commercial product, service, or activity. SVF's production of this event does not constitute endorsement by SVF or its representatives. All SVF programs and services are extended to the public on a non-discriminatory basis. And we thank you for your support. So let me transition to the conversation. And John, welcome. Good afternoon. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So you and I did meet fairly recently on the sidelines of the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference in downtown San Francisco. And you were scheduled to give a presentation. Unfortunately, I had other conflicts with some business matters that took me away from your presentation. But you and I had the chance to really talk before then, and then I returned to the event, and you and I kind of continued the conversation for a bit before we parted ways. I was very intrigued about the problem you're solving and who you're solving it for and how you're solving it. But let me turn that question to you and explain to us what is the big picture, that the problem you're solving, who is experiencing your problem, because obviously you're solving the problem for children, but obviously you're in a marketplace where you've got customers, they're paying for this, as a solution to solving children's scoliosis, and then kind of spend some time about how you're solving the problem and the technology and device behind that.
Absolutely happy to. So, children's scoliosis affects over 1 million patients in the United States annually every year. Scoliosis is a lateral sideways curve of the spine. It's abnormal, and it can cause a cascade of problems. Just a 10-degree curve to the side is considered scoliosis, but that's kind of a condition where we watch and wait and monitor. It is a degenerative condition, and a lot of these children's scoliosis curves progress. When they get to be about 20 or to 25 degrees to the side, these children are prescribed torso braces, basically a cast for their body that they strap themselves into. They have to wear these 20, 23 hours a day, just take them off for showering, wear them at night sleeping. And the goal of the cast is to prevent their spine from degenerating more and curving more. And in many of those patients, that is a successful treatment, although success is defined as that their spine doesn't get worse. These casts, these braces don't generally straighten the spine. But unfortunately, for about 40,000 children every year, their spines continue to degenerate in spite of the monitoring of exercise and these torso braces, and they get curves of 40 degrees or more. In that situation, there is major problems happening for these children in their torso area. Their lungs aren't growing properly, their abdominal organs are getting crushed. So to prevent very extensive complications, these children go through surgery to straighten their spines. For the last 40 plus years, the surgery has been a fusion where they go through a huge operation. They're cut open from the base of their neck down to their hips. Their back's flayed open. They get 2 long titanium rods and dozens of screws attached to their spine. And yes, their spine is straightened, but the spine can no longer move. It's fused together. They have a long, week plus recovery in the hospital, several month recovery after that at the home. And they no longer can compete in really competitive sports because their spine's not moving. They're facing a lifetime of complications. The basic ones like a neural injury from a spine surgery, an infection, implant breaking. But it goes beyond that. The majority of these children who go through these surgeries are girls. It's about a 8-to-1 girl to boy surgery rate, even though scoliosis starts evenly in both sexes. The adolescent girls appear to degenerate quicker and require these surgeries. And once they're fused, one of the complications that occurs for them is later in life when they go through pregnancy. 35% of these patients with these scoliosis fusions have major complications during pregnancy that require either hospitalization or home care and bed rest. And after they give birth, 75% of them have heightened chronic pain. So significant complications well beyond what the general population sees. And that is the gold standard. We want to change all that for these patients by providing them a solution that doesn't fuse their spine. Our device is called a dynamic tethering system. So we use a polymer strap that is flexible to pull the spine straight. And we implant it through a minimally invasive surgery. So just 4 or 5 1-centimeter incisions in the child's back to put the portals in and the scope. And so under video guidance, they place the screws and are strapped in the patient's spine and pull the spine straight. We also implant an adjuster. So one end of the strap is spooled up on a magnetic adjuster. That gets implanted in the body. And then after the surgery, these patients go through regular checkups. They come back. Oh, and with that minimally invasive surgery, the patient's only in the hospital for 2 or 3 days, and their recovery at home is only a week or so, and then they're back to their normal activities. And I mean normal activities. With this flexible strap, they maintain the majority of the motion of their spine so they can continue to do active sports and the like. When they come back for valuation under normal periods, which happens whether they're getting a fusion or our product, the doctor in their office or clinic will, evaluate, do an examination of the patient, take a history of what's happened, and they'll get an x-ray to see what the condition of the spine is. At that time, if the surgeon wants to make a change to our implant, they can use a handheld magnetic controller, place it up against the child's back, turn it on, and with that controller, they are able to access the implant that went in and either increase the tension by spooling the tether up or decrease the tension by unspooling the tether. And in that manner, fine-tune the results of the surgery over time for that patient so they get a personalized medical solution. And these visits happen regularly, 3 months, 6 months, a year. And in this case, we're talking some patients that could be 10 or 11 years old. They have several years of growing to go, and our device can continue to be lengthened so that they can reach their full height while maintaining this mobility. So fundamentally, our patient is the child, but our customer really is the pediatric spine surgeon who's doing these operations. They're the one who is assessing each patient, deciding what their condition is, what the best type of surgery for that patient is, and hopefully picking our product to use in the surgery to treat them.
Quite fascinating, John. Starting with children, at what age, what's the age range of using this product, and when does a children get diagnosed? How soon are they diagnosed with scoliosis, and what are some of the early signs of that diagnosis?
Well, there's actually several different subsets of scoliosis in children, but the most prevalent is called adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, or AIS. And as the name implies, adolescent, it's generally in the age range of like 11 to 14 or 15, those adolescent years. Idiopathic means that the medical community does not have a clear understanding of what causes this condition. It's known that it's a degenerative condition. There are some genetic traits, meaning that it can occur in families repetitively, but the exact mechanism that causes this problem isn't well understood. What is understood is the impact on these children, and that's our target market for our initial product rollout. That's the biggest market in these children. That's the 40,000 a year I spoke about just in the U.S. alone. Close to 100,000 around the globe. So it's not necessarily a specific age. Most of us in our generation, Aaron, we remember that in school you got screened. They would have you go into the gym. You'd bend over, and somebody would look at what your back was doing and say whether or not you needed to go see a doctor because you had some curvature. Some schools still do those screenings, but a lot of that is left now to the general practitioner, the family doctor, who's seeing these children and watching their progression. But it's not a specific age; it's in that range, and even in that range, the condition can occur, at any time in their age. As I said earlier, it occurs about equally in the initial diagnosis in boys and girls, but girls progress to a more severe case in a much higher rate. Maybe that's partially due to their earlier growth spurts in adolescence. Again, it's not totally understood. Now, in addition to that adolescent idiopathic scoliosis market, there are other children that have scoliosis problems. Early onset scoliosis is happening in children really in the 7, 8, and 9-year-old range. And that's a real big problem, in particular because these children are so small. Now, in that market, they don't fuse the spine at the time of the surgery like they do in the adolescent idiopathic one, but they put in rods that are called growing rods so that these children can continue to grow because they're so small, they really don't want to fuse their spines at that point. But most of those systems they use today require additional surgeries or interventions so that at least under local anesthesia, the doctor can do incisions and access the system in the child's back and lengthen it periodically so they can continue to grow. That's an area that we believe our platform product will be able to help as well. But we're focused on the adolescent children at this point. And then there's some other smaller groups as well. Neuromuscular scoliosis, again, that can occur in that younger age set, or even younger, that are congenital problems. And again, those are really important patients to address. But thankfully, and they're complicated, but thankfully, much fewer children go through that problem than the adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. So that's where we're going to be focused in the near term. In the long run, we hope to be able to address all these different types of children's scoliosis.
Let me ask you about then on the what I call the provider side. So the surgeons and the clinics are the users and customers, for lack of a better word. And so tell us more about a couple, 2 or 3 questions in this question. Where are you on the product development? What is kind of the business model? And where does, I guess, 4 questions, the business model, the competitive landscape, what does that look like? And then what role does insurance play into this? I mean, I'm certainly not even close to being an expert in what I call med tech or life sciences, but I keep on hearing about the importance, and this is really a question that I hear from investors in this space, is the role of insurance and reimbursement, from insurance and insurance providers. So I'll throw that out to you and take one piece by piece.
Yeah, well, thanks, Aaron. Those are all very important questions. So, Auctus Surgical is still in the preclinical phase with our product development, meaning at this point we have not yet started clinical trials in patients. We have implanted our system in animal models to prove its safety and the fact that we can do the adjustments. And so we've gone through that phase of testing. We've done 3-month studies in animals where we've done the initial surgery. And then after that, come back every few weeks and done the non-invasive magnetic adjustment of the implant and taken the x-rays before and after the adjustment to show that we can modify the implant after the surgery. And we've successfully completed those studies. And we're queuing up to start our clinical trial in 2026. And when I say queuing up, for this kind of a product, we require FDA approval to do the clinical study. It's called an investigational device exemption, or an IDE. So we actually make a submission to the FDA with the design of the product and all the testing we've done on the bench and in animals, and our clinical protocol to get their review and blessing and approval to do this clinical study in the US. Now, that sounds like a lot, and it is, but we've already interacted with the FDA 5 different times prior to this point in time. And in those interactions, we've made submissions to them to get their feedback, both on our animal testing, our bench testing, and our clinical protocol. So from that standpoint, we've gotten the FDA feedback. We've de-risked those concerns from the FDA. They're very supportive of what we're doing. In fact, one of those submissions to the FDA was what was called a breakthrough device designation submission. And we have been granted breakthrough device designation from the FDA, which means what we're doing is unlike anything else that's available in the market today. And it looks to be a significant breakthrough or improvement for patients. So they want to acknowledge that. And that gives us a bit of a fast track with the FDA, meaning that when we send in our IDE submission, they'll review it in an expeditious manner compared to products that don't have that designation. And then further down the road, after we've done that clinical trial and we have our data and we submit that to the FDA for clearance to sell the product, again, they will review it quickly. And as I said, the FDA is very supportive. But you mentioned this, the FDA is one leg of the hurdles that products in the medical device space have to overcome and satisfy to get to market. Another one is the payer, is insurance. And in this case, we're talking about children. So for the most part, this is private insurance. This is certainly not going to be covered by Medicare at all. That's not the patient population. There could be some cases of Medicaid coverage. But yes, there is that extra hurdle for medical devices to prove to insurance companies and potentially the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid services and reimbursement that the product should be paid for. In our case, we're quite fortunate for a couple of reasons. One, we're not inventing a brand new surgical intervention. The scoliosis surgery, as I said, has been around for 40, 50 years. It's well established in these hospitals and in insurers and payers' minds. So it's actually a very complicated surgery and an expensive surgery. The literature shows that the typical reimbursement to the hospital for a scoliosis surgery is $150,000 on average. So it can go up from there, obviously. So that is representative of how long the surgery is, how complex, and how long the recovery in the hospital can be. So it's quite expensive. Part of that reimbursement of the hospital goes towards the devices used in the implant put into the patient. In our case, instead of the solid rods and screws that have been traditionally used, we're doing screws with a flexible tether in this adjustment system. In some cases, that would require us to go to the HMMS and to go to private insurers and show them what we're doing and ask for coverage. Auctus has the advantage in that about 8 years ago, a large corporation, Zimmer Biomet, took an old product they had used for adult spine surgery and said, hey, maybe we can use this product in scoliosis. And so they really blazed this pathway in terms of the insurance reimbursement. They have a polymer cord, like a thick shoelace that they also put in minimally invasive to the spine in small incisions, and they screw it to the side of the spine to pull it straight. So that is different from the fusion surgery. Their product, though, is not adjustable without additional surgeries. If that cord needs to be adjusted, the child has to go through a whole other surgery. And I have been in the OR in various hospitals where, a child who got that implanted when they were 10 had to go through another surgery when they were 11 to make a change. We're trying to prevent that. But the positive aspect for business as far as Auctus goes is that Zimmer, being a large corporation, they had the resources to really tackle this particular hurdle with the payers and insurers. And in that field, you need coding for your procedure. Then you need coverage that the insurance companies are going to do it, and then establish the payment level. So Zimmer did that for these tethers. And a year ago, the temporary coding they had established became permanent. So now, any doctor in the country who's doing one of these procedures can use that code. The hospital can submit it, and they can expect that it's recognized by insurance companies and payers. And they've also established very coverage for most of the major payers and very good coverage, very good payment. So from our standpoint, they really open the gate for us. And part of that is that payment they're getting is higher than what the rods and screws are getting paid. And that's because the hospital stay is much shorter. All in all, using their tether or the Auctus tether, the procedure is going to be less complex, less recovery time, and the patients are going to be discharged from the hospital sooner, lowering the costs overall. And then some of that reduced cost is being ferried over to the manufacturer of the implant. So we'll actually get a little bit higher reimbursement than the rods and screws, but overall the hospital saves money, the insurers save money. And then with our product, the patient gets a better outcome. So it is a win-win for all the players involved. And you asked about customers earlier. I did mention that, our ultimate customer are these children as patients, but the surgeons select the product. But our customer also includes the hospital, and it includes the insurance companies. So for a new product coming to market, the standard process, if you have reimbursement, is you'd still have to go to each hospital and go to their value-added committee, their new products committee, and say, here's our product. We're using this in a procedure like these other products you've already approved. Please put us on your formulary and approve our product for use in our hospital. If you're doing that and you're going to charge the same as products they're already purchasing, and a surgeon at that hospital, goes to that committee and says, I want to use this new product, then it's a relatively straightforward approval process. If you don't have a surgeon champion at that hospital, or you're asking or you're hoping to get more payment from the hospital, you're going to have to do a lot more work to get approval. And that work could look like, we'd like to do a pilot study in your institution. Let us do 10 patients with our product. We'll give you the product, but we'll collect the data showing what their charges are from the time they're admitted to when they're discharged, and follow them for complications that might hit your institution. And we'll compare that to 10 patients with the products you're using today. And, maybe 6 months later, we can show you, if you use our product, it'll save you money. But sometimes you have to go through that kind of a process before you'll get approved, if you're asking for a higher reimbursement. So you talked about the go-to-market strategy, or asked about that, and competitors. I'll hit the competitors first. So today we have multiple competitors in this market, and they kind of fit into two categories. There's the fusion rods and screws, which are still the gold standard in the traditional way of doing this procedure. And then there is the new tethers that are static tethers that aren't adjustable, like Auctus's system. In the rods and screws areas, there are multiple companies that have those systems, including Medtronic, Johnson & Johnson, Globus Medical, Orthofix. Now, there were two big players, Zimmer, like I mentioned, and Stryker. But what's interesting in the spine market is both of those companies, Stryker just earlier this year and Zimmer 2 years ago, decided to take their spine products and spin them out. So the Zimmer is completely focused on hips and knees and other peripheral joints. They don't do any spine surgery anymore. And they also spun out their dentistry business. And Stryker, is still doing hips and knees and other orthopedics and other areas in medicine, but they've spun out their spine business as well. From Auctus's standpoint, I see both of these changes as a positive because now instead of very large corporations that are looking for a product tuck-in and an M&A acquisition, which is Auctus's ultimate exit opportunity, we're dealing with more mid-sized firms that are very focused in this market, and they could see the impact that Auctus could have for them. So I think both of those spin-outs are a plus for our company. But the Zimmer spine products are now held by a private equity-backed company called High Ridge Medical. And so they have a static tether. And then Globus Medical as well brought out about not quite 2 years ago, their static tether. And the reason they were able to bring it out just a couple years ago is because, as I mentioned, Stryker was repurposing, and I'm sorry, Zimmer was repurposing an old product. So there's no patent coverage on the static tether concept and that design. So Globus just had to go through the regulatory hurdle of doing a clinical study, and their product looks essentially the same as Zimmer's, now owned by High Ridge. So those are two competitors in the static tether area. We like that because it's showing the marketplace and investors that what we're doing is important, that it's important enough for two large companies to have products in that area. We're aware that a couple other efforts are underway to bring other products in that static tether field to market, which again is great, validates the market. And that's half of our competition. The other half are those rods and screws that all those various companies I mentioned earlier have. We believe that Auctus can, take that market share away from those static tether companies and some of the rods and screws because we offer more features than the static tethers on the market today. But obviously, big competitors, a lot of headwinds for us. So what's our go-to-market? In general, in the medical device space, the most important thing that you need in this area is clinical data, outcome data that shows your product's capabilities and shows its either equivalence or superiority to what is being offered in the marketplace prior to your launch. We'll have to collect that data as part of our FDA process, but beyond using that data to get FDA clearance, that data is our number one sales tool. We expect that after doing our pivotal clinical trial, we'll have 2-year outcome data that shows what our adverse events rate is and what our complication rate is. And it'll show that in both instances, those rates are significantly lower than the static tethers that are on the market today, meaning that anyone using those products or any patient that those would be applicable to would have a better outcome using our product. And that's our kind of our beachhead launch strategy. However, I'll say that that's the initial starting point. In the medical space, I'd say, I think you have, a couple of areas of defense and offense. One of the big areas of defense is your patent portfolio, but another that's both offense and defense is your clinical data. So even though we need to do a pivotal study and collect data for the FDA, our work there isn't done at that point. That is our starting point, which again, I think will show superiority and be a great sales tool. But we'll continue to collect data, and not just data that is provided to the FDA, but data that's presented at medical surgical meetings, data that's published in top peer-reviewed journals, that is repetitive, showing the consistency of the outcomes of our product. And the more we can collect and publish that, the stronger our offense can be in the marketplace. Beyond that, in terms of the particulars, we'll have a internal sales and marketing management team to drive adoption, and we'll use primarily independent distributors to sell our product. That keeps our sales costs low because we won't be paying salaries, just commissions. But it also is very useful in this particular marketplace. As you mentioned earlier, we're a very experienced team. I've developed multiple orthopedic and spine products in the past, and it's been a fairly standard practice to go to market using independent distributors. In fact, it's not just small startup companies that use this. Some of the biggest corporations out there also use distributors because these distributors have great relationships with the surgeons in the hospitals. They can be very focused on particular high volume centers, and they can drive more sales than a salesperson who's spread out over a territory. So we've used that formula in the past successfully. It keeps the go-to-market, costs low and can drive the sales revenue up quickly without a lot of upfront expense. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still expensive to launch and go to market. This pediatric market, though, in spine is actually very attractive. The vast majority, 90% plus of these surgeries are done in children's hospitals and large academic centers. So compared to the greater universe of hospital sales in the medical device space, where there is 6,000 plus hospitals in the United States alone. In this market, you're talking about only on the order of a few hundred hospitals that are doing 90% of this. So it's a focused market. And then on top of that, that reimbursement that I mentioned earlier that Zimmer established for these is quite high, on the range of $26,000 to $40,000 for the implant. The reason why there's a range is not because some institutions are getting a better deal than others. It's because in spine surgery, the price for the implant and also the surgeon's reimbursement for their time in the OR is based on the number of spine levels that are treated. Unlike a knee where you're doing one knee replacement or a hip, you're doing one hip. In the spine, there are dozen plus levels that could be involved in scoliosis. I'd say at a minimum, you're probably fusing or tethering 5 or 6 levels, but that can go up. That can go up to 8, 10, 12, 15 levels, depending on how big a problem it is, how complex the curve is in these children. So the low end, if it's just a few levels that are being tethered, would be in that $26,000 range. But if you're doing an extensive amount in the spine from the lumbar all the way through the thoracic, it could be in the order of $40,000 for the implant itself. So you can imagine with just a few hundred hospitals and a very high average selling price that the sales rate for Auctus Surgical can grow quite rapidly. We project that we would reach profitability after 3 years of launch at a $50 million run rate.
Well, one of the questions I was going to ask you was why, why do investors love you and why are they investing? But we'll keep that one in. We're going to table that question. I do want to get into kind of what was you've helped found the company, I believe, in 2017. Then you stepped into the role as CEO in 2023. But tell us more about your background. You've got a couple of degrees from MIT. Where did you grow up? Was your plan? Your career is quite extensive and impressive with some really big names out there. You were with Abbott at one point and with Medtronic, both big names. You've been involved in a number of other startups and as a co-founder, and you've had some successful exits. So tell us about, why was Auctus Surgical founded? What was the team early thinking? and tell us more about where you grew up, your education, and your career path.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was fortunate. I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado. It's a great community, really amazing environment at that time to grow up with. I mean, the world, the outdoor world was definitely your oyster. I really enjoyed that. Um, as part of that, I was required to enter regional science fairs, right? The state high school science fair, regional science fairs, as part of like the curriculum in high school as being in AP calculus or honors math or science. That was one of the requirements. So, in one of those events, my junior year in high school, I did a really fun project examining soap bubbles films and their properties. That was the title of my project. And it's an interesting investigation into surface tension. And surface tension in soap bubbles always creates um, the least possible surface area for the volume. And so I examined that and I made a bunch of forms that the audience, the participants could dip into soap, watery soap solution and see what formed inside those things. And it wasn't necessarily what you expected, but as part of my project, I had to do all the calculations of why that was actually the less surface area than the shape you would have expected. Um, and for some reason that resonated, right? It was a fun project, that it was interactive, and it did use, some advanced calculus. So, it progressed from the high school to the region to the state science fair. And, at the Colorado State Science Fair, I won for my project. And part of my winning was a subscription to MIT's Technology Review magazine. I came home from the science fair and told my mother that, and she just decided right then and there that's where I was going to school. So I didn't really have much of a choice. Happy that I was accepted and I got in, and a great institution. I got my, as you said, I got my bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering there. At that time, there weren't really uh, biomedical or biomechanical programs around the country. Now, lots of universities offer those types of degrees, even bioelectrical degrees. And those are really the types of uh, undergraduate and then graduate degrees that students are getting now that are entering the medical device industry. But in my day, that wasn't it offered. I was a mechanical engineer, and as you said, I was actually very fortunate. I left the East Coast and went west. Young man, came out to Silicon Valley because I had other college friends who were out here and doing well. And I landed very firmly in my first job working for Abbott Labs. Worked for them developing diagnostic catheters, was recruited from Abbott to Medtronic to develop electrophysiology catheters to treat arrhythmias in the heart. And you say, wow, but those are Midwest companies. I was in Silicon Valley doing those, uh, uh, starting my career. And it's because the beginning of the medical device innovation revolution had already started in Silicon Valley. And the company, when I worked for Abbott, that was a startup they had bought 3 years earlier. And when I got recruited for Medtronic, uh, the three principals at that location weren't there at my first day at work because Medtronic had acquired that startup 1 year prior, and they had gotten through their golden handcuffs and they left to start their next company. There was plenty of other employees from the early startup days there, so it was quite fun and exciting to work there. But actually, in addition to giving me a strong foundation in the medical device industry, working at both Abbott and Medtronic in Silicon Valley got me kind of that startup fever. I mean, I was working for big corporations, but with people who had done the startups, it was quite interesting to learn from them. And after Medtronic, I got recruited into my first startup called Ortec Interventions. And although Abbott and Medtronic were both catheter cardiovascular companies, Ortec was an orthopedic company developing single-use disposable surgical tools and minimally invasive probes to be used in joint and spine surgery to treat problems without that were early on the cascade, prior to needing a total hip or a total knee, to do a repair and avoid that kind of a bigger surgery. So I was the fifth employee at Ortec, and I was recruited to start their program in the spine. So that was my initiation into the spine market and the spine anatomy and pathology. I developed a catheter that went through a needle into the intervertebral body disc to heat it, to try to generate a healing response. And that product was very successful. It generated over half of Ortec's revenues, over 25 million a year. Ortec grew from 5 employees to over 150. We had an initial public offering, and a little over a year later, we were acquired by Smith and Nephew at a $320 million valuation. So certainly, I got my Silicon Valley startup experience in spades there, going from 5 to 150, and developing that kind of a product and getting that outcome. I was also promoted twice there, coming in as a senior R&D project manager, and then being promoted to engineering manager and then director of R&D with the entire R&D group of 22 engineers, technicians, and scientists working for me. And we, at Ortec, we developed and commercialized over 36 different products for all these different joint indications, which led to that acquisition by Smith and Nephew. I had the bug, and I really haven't looked back since then. I have worked for multiple startups after that. And you mentioned, there have been great experiences and opportunities there. I was recruited from Smith and Nephew to work for Fox Hollow Technologies. That was one of Dr. John Simpson's startups. Dr. Simpson, I think at this point, maybe has founded 8 or more startup companies, all in the cardiovascular space. He is a cardiologist and was around in the early days of balloon catheters, helped develop those and use those in the first patients. And he's developed multiple companies in that space. Fox Hollow developed a really, really tiny carving plane to go into the vasculature and shave plaque off the inside of arteries, capture it, and pull it out of the patient's body. So something that had never been done before. And I was recruited to be the vice president of R&D there. Company was very successful up until that point in time. In Silicon Valley and around the country in the cardiovascular space, you would develop your product and maybe test it in the peripheral vasculature, which meant in the legs, maybe in the kidneys. But your real goal was to use it in the heart disease, and maybe for stroke prevention in the carotids. That was where the money was. But in the meantime, you might get an early approval in the peripheral vasculature, start making money and learn more about your product, fine tune it so you could make big bucks in the heart. Well, Fox Hollow flipped that script and got our approval for taking the plaque out of the legs. And these were patients that were facing amputations if they didn't get better blood flow to their legs. So very high need area. They were wildly successful in their sales, actually increased the ASPs for 2-3 years in a row because the demand was so high for the product and the impact on patients was so great. Fox Hollow had an IPO and then was acquired by a company called EV3 for over $700 million. So another fantastic startup outcome. I left Fox Hollow prior to that ultimate exit to co-found my first company with an orthopedic surgeon from Stanford called Sapphire Medical, and we made an implant to treat rotator cuff repair injuries, which you hear about a lot of times in athletes, across the board. Baseball, football, golf, tennis. They can get these injuries, and also weekend warriors, right? We're not immune from these types of problems, and we developed a new next generation device for that, got our FDA approval, and sold the product to a French company before actually ever even doing any clinical studies. It was an area that was rapidly progressing, and new innovations were happening, and the various strategic corporations didn't want to be left behind. So this company snatched it up and they drove the sales. We didn't have to do any clinical trial or not. So that was a little bit opposite of those first two startups where they were both multiple rounds, growing the company, growing sales, and getting a very large exit. This was one round and done, getting a FDA clearance, just three co-founders and selling the company quickly. Still a great outcome from the founders and the investor standpoint, but much less money overall involved. I see as Auctus as being somewhat in between those kind of extreme examples. We will collect clinical data, as I said, but I do see an opportunity for Auctus to be acquired without having to grow the sales, which is more of the typical exit pathway for medical devices. And that's because of what we're doing and then the changes in this marketplace. With these two static tether companies in the market space now, we believe by the time we get our FDA clearance, there'll be at least a third. There'll be a new market established, and our clinical data will show superiority. So not only will each of those companies be potential acquirers because they'll want to have a better product, but the companies still on the sidelines that won't have entered that particular niche won't have a product, and they won't want to be left behind. So I think we can get an exit via an auction with FDA clearance in that clinical data. Obviously, as we discussed earlier, we'll plan to commercialize and grow in the marketplace. But if we can get good terms and an early exit, we'd be happy to do that and get that outcome for our investors.
Wonderful. What are some lessons learned? It's kind of a two-part question. Most companies of various sizes, right, fail. They don't succeed, right? They just the general odds are against them, and mostly because, and I've had my own startups as well, and I've been blessed that some have done incredibly well, and I've had a couple that crash and burned, and then I've also experienced both as an investor. The ones that have underperformed, either miserably to where the company's insolvent or didn't produce the return on investment that was intended from the get-go, isn't because of lack of opportunity, it's because of risk factors, any number of risk factors. And whether you want to talk about Auctus or your other ventures or other experiences, but what are some of the risk factors you've encountered, and how do you mitigate that risk? And it's kind of a lesson for people that are going to watch this or thinking about launching their own venture in the future.
Well, I would say in the medical technology space, probably one of the unique things that is a significant risk is ensuring that your product, your technology is laser focused on a significant problem and a significant need. And that need should be coming from the patient, the surgeon, the hospital. It should be well defined and it should be significant. So by that, I mean, if you want a great return, it's important to have a great impact. If you're looking at what's out there in the marketplace now and say, oh, they're doing this, and I've got an idea that's going to improve it by 10%, 20%. That is not only a hard sell to the hospital or to the surgeon or patient, but it's a a competition race. You're going to be going up against established players, and you're going to be doing it on slim margins potentially. It's much better and much greater risk reduction to go after something that's significant, that's not being addressed today. We believe Auctus is doing that by providing a significantly better outcome for these scoliosis patients and a much better, long-term life for them than they're being offered today. And we do believe it's going to reduce costs to the hospital as well, make the job of the surgeon easier. So we think we're going to check all those boxes. I'd say that's the number one risk mitigation thing. I know a lot of investors in this space. One of the things they like to see is an actual MD, a doctor, as an employee on staff, somebody whose job it is to stay focused on the patient, on the hospital, the clinical need. Sometimes sometimes depending on the product, it can be an RN. It can be, a PhD who's got a lot of experience in the market in a research in that area, but somebody who stays focused on that so the company doesn't pivot into a direction that, is maybe looks attractive. Maybe there's an idea that it might generate more money, but it's not focused on what the patient needs. In my experience with the successful startups, when they stay focused on what that patient needs, what that surgeon needs, the economic success doesn't necessarily take care of itself, but it's a lot easier than if you're just looking for economic success as your primary goal. So that's a big risk factor. The other areas we've spoken about already are unique to this, right? The regulatory hurdles and the reimbursement hurdles. Those are probably the next two big ones in the medical technology space. The way to reduce risk on the regulatory, talk to the FDA often, talk to them early. Find out what they're thinking, don't guess. There's processes put in place where you put together what's called a pre-submission to describe what you're doing, how you want to prove it out, and send it to the FDA, get their feedback. Do they agree with you? Do they think your pathway to the market is what you think it is in terms of the regulatory requirements? So that reduces risk. And as I said, we've done 5 of those with the FDA to make sure we've reduced that as much as possible. The reimbursement, have a strategy early. If you need to get a new code, how are you going to get that code? If you need to establish greater payment from the insurance companies, what are the steps you're going to do? What's the data you're going to collect to present to them to make that argument and get that reimbursement? Planning that out and allocating the resources to it are very important. Those are the 3 big ones. I know, we're in Silicon Valley and a lot of sophisticated investors, they say, oh, the technology, that'll get worked out. There's a lot of smart people, right? They generally don't put a huge amount of risk on that. In my experience in the medical device space, that does hold true as well. I mean, that doesn't mean you don't have hiccups and you don't have to go through, multiple iterations before your product is satisfying all the requirements and all the needs. But that's something within your control. I'll just want to add this too. In my experience, probably the most important thing to do in a medical technology company is to prove that your technology works as soon as possible. And when I say that it works, that means how quickly can you go and treat patients safely? You could spend a lot of time in the lab, on the bench, testing your product. You can spend a lot of time trying it out in various animal models, and all of that is important. But it is very true that the first, half a dozen patients that you treat with a brand new product, you're going to learn more than, 200, 300 animals and 3 years on the bench, right? Ultimately, your product is designed to treat patients. You want to treat those patients and show it works. You have to do it safely, though. You can't, go there with a product that's half baked. You have to do it safely. You have to do rigorous testing to show your product is safe. But how fast can you get to that point? And to me, that's the ultimate de-risk. If you can show your product works and it treats the patient as you intended and it's safe, you've basically taken out, over half the risk, depending on the product, even more. Then you've just got more of a market adoption kind of a risk left. Um, so in my experience, I like to set up a new startup to be very capital efficient. How much of this do we need to own and work on internally with employees? What parts can we outsource that aren't critical so we keep our burn rate down? How much can we do this development in parallel and bring it together? And then go into the hospital, go into the actual clinic, do a first in human clinical trial and prove the product out. That's my, biggest piece of advice. Get there and learn quickly.
Appreciate that, John. I think we're going to have to end the conversation there. This is great information. I think you and your colleagues are doing something wonderful to make children's lives better. And I really appreciate you taking the time to explain the story, both of the company and your own personal story, what motivates you and going forward. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for the opportunity. It was a pleasure to speak with you today.
And we'll hopefully have the opportunity to continue the conversation in the future. So we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Right.